Good evening and welcome to tonight's event, which we welcome Micky Hazard to. If you have any questions, please put them on the comments on Facebook and we will answer as many as we can. We'll get through them as quickly as possible. Okay, so I'm just going to bring in Vic now, who will be your host for this evening. Hi, Vic.
Hi, Chris. How are you? On a good day for Swindon Town fans, I think, with the news of Anthony Grant and Taylor Curran, I see tonight.
Extra year's extension. Yeah, it's brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, so are you ready for Mr. Hazard then? Should we bring him in?
Absolutely. Let's get this started. Yeah, definitely.
Right. Okay. There we go. Yeah. You okay there, Micky?
I'm very good, thank you. Good evening, everyone.
Hiya. Right, I'm going to leave you now and I will come back with some questions at the end.
Okay. Chris, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Yeah, just to reiterate that news today, Anthony Grant has signed a new one-year contract at the club, so he'll be in League One with Swindon next season. And Taylor Curran has signed a 3-year deal tonight, I see, as well. So decent deals by Swindon Town today as they prepare for life in League One. Micky Hazard, a very good evening to you.
Good evening to you, Vic. How are you?
I'm very well. And first of all, let's ask you how you are, because as we know, we're doing these events because of the strange times that we live in, and we pass our very best wishes on to everybody who's been affected, one of whom was you. So tell us your story, if you like, Michael.
Well, I was... it's quite funny, really. I was having some building work done, and they were due to start on March the 10th, and they couldn't because they'd got symptoms. So the guy who was the owner of the company, that it was a friend of mine, he came round because he felt bad. So he came round, sat with me, and then he said to me, "Would you like to go for breakfast?" So I said, "Yeah, let's go to the local golf club." Obviously, lockdown hadn't started at this stage. And nor had social distancing. So I said, let's go to the local golf club. So we set off, we gets in the car and we're driving down to the golf club and he starts to cough. So I looked across at him and I said, "That's not what I think, is it?" He said, "No, I've got something tickling my throat." Anyway, we get to the golf club, all the way through breakfast he's coughing, all the way back to home he's coughing. And I'm thinking, oh no, but I'm far enough away in the car. He's there, and I'm a good 3 foot away. You know, he's in the passenger seat. So I'm thinking I might get away with it. Next day, the phone rings, and it's him, John, and he rings me and says, "I'm sorry, I've been tested for COVID, and I've got it." So now I'm thinking, oh no. So I sat around for 4 or 5 days because at that stage it was a 5-day. And after 5 days, I didn't have it. And I thought, oh, I've got away with it. And then on the Tuesday morning, I woke up with a slight cough. It was very slight. And then by Wednesday morning, it was still slight. By Thursday morning, it got a little bit more intense. And by Thursday afternoon, I was in bed, couldn't move. I couldn't move. It was incredible. And I had this cough, and even when I sort of had it for a week, this couldn't move. And on the following Thursday, so it was almost 9 days, I rang 111 and explained my symptoms and everything to them. They instantly said, "You've got to get to Chase Farm Hospital now." I went straight away to Chase Farm Hospital, got tested. Unfortunately for me, my cough, I feel I'm coughing now. My cough at that point was really, really, really bad. But when they tested me, my blood oxygen levels crashed down to 88. So they immediately sent me to the North Middlesex Hospital, who obviously would take me into a ward and put me on oxygen machine. Thankfully, my oxygen came after about 5 hours of being on the oxygen machine. They put me on, it sort of went back up to 95. Now, they then said, look, you can stay the night because it was 2, 3 in the morning, and see how you are tomorrow, or you can go home. Well, I thought, I don't want to be hanging around here with all this around. So I thought, I'll go home, and if I get ill again, I'll come back. So I went to home. Honestly, 3 days in bed, 16 hours sleep a day. I couldn't get out of bed. And then I woke up on I think it was the Wednesday morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. Got up out of bed. I couldn't get off the bed. I got up out of bed. I went downstairs. I made a drink, made a sandwich, sat and ate the sandwich at 4 o'clock in the morning, walked around as if nothing had happened. I was absolutely, apart from the cough, which stayed with me another 2 weeks, I absolutely was right as rain. And from that day, I never looked back other than the cough. The cough frustrated me to death. It wouldn't go. But from that day onwards, having had 3 days of, I couldn't move. It just disappeared as quickly as it had come. It was incredible. So it wasn't a good experience.
No, I can imagine. And we're hearing now, of course, of people having the after effects of this thing. Are you okay now? You're feeling all right? You're okay?
It's difficult to say because during the old 6 months, sort of just from December right the way through to June, I had 4 operations. It shouldn't have been 4, it should have only been 1. But unfortunately, there was 1 or 2 mistakes made, and it ended up 4 operations, with the 4th one being the biggest and most complicated of all, due to the mistakes that were made prior and as a consequence of the delay with COVID. So I had that, and is there after effects of COVID? Maybe, and no doubt we'll find out soon. I'm seeing a cardiologist and a urologist, hopefully this week, or certainly next week, because after the 4th operation, I started to get heart palpitations where I was missing a beat in my heart every 10 beats. Now I've heard that that's one of the consequences of COVID. I'll find out soon enough, I'm sure. But I'm healthy, as you can see. I feel great. I'm fit. The 4th operation worked a treat, or it certainly appears to so far, which was only 2.5 to 3 weeks ago. And I'm in no pain, whereas I was in pain for 7 months, and I'm not bleeding at all, no bleeding whatsoever. Yet I bled for 7 months. So the 4th operation appears to have been a really big success, and certainly I feel so much better as a consequence of that operation. Although there's been 1 or 2 after effects that I've got to deal with, but hopefully, as time passes, they'll disappear as well. I had so many operations in such a short space of time, and 2 of the operations ended up being sort of very, very long because of a complication that arose because the stent that they put into my kidney to enable it to work had been in for 7 months when it was only supposed to be in 2 months. So it calcified, got a stone that grew on top of the stent, and then lodged itself into the kidney. So it became a very complex operation to undo it all. But they did it brilliant. So, shouldn't have happened. Some say it was unlucky. I just say that the first operation, they should have did everything then. But at the end of the day, can't criticise them. They worked their socks off and they did the job.
Well, we wish you well, obviously, and it's great that you're feeling better. And it has been a terrible time for many people.
Yes.
Very sorry that you've had to go through this.
Don't be sorry for me, Vic. There's a lot of people out there.
Yeah, I understand that, but obviously, anybody who's been affected by this, we pass on our best wishes. You mentioned the North Middlesex Hospital, and that, by strange coincidence, was somewhere that you were kind of familiar when you first moved down from Sunderland. Is that right? Because it wasn't far from where you were staying when you started with Tottenham. Is that right?
When I first came down from Sunderland, I lived in Diggs, literally from the ward that I was in during the operations, I literally was a 1-minute walk. So I lived directly next door to the hospital. You know, if I cross the road from the road where I lived, cross over the road, and about a 30 or 40 yard walk up is the entrance to the A&E, which takes you through to the ward. So I actually knew it incredibly well. That didn't mean that I didn't have to pay 25 quid a day of parking charges. Honestly, I got the shock of my life because I obviously when you go to an hospital, you don't know how long you're going to be there. So one of my operations, for instance, I got told, I got to the hospital at 3 a.m. So I put 4 hours in, thinking, 4 hours, I should be home. Anyway, they then said, you'll be seeing a urologist at 9 o'clock. So then I put another 4 hours in. And then at 9 o'clock, they said, you'll be having an operation today. So I said, oh, great. Well, the operation didn't come till 5 o'clock. So every 4 hours, I was having to put a fiver in. So by the end of the day, I was broke. I needed to start playing again to pay for it.
Well, let's talk about your start then, because you obviously born in Sunderland in 1960. You're younger than I am. I'll just throw that one in.
You look well.
Thank you. But when you first started, you spotted by Tottenham at a very early age, weren't you? But,
yeah.
And it was a bit of a stop-start time for you, I think, wasn't it? Because homesickness played a part. You're from the northeast, you go to the southeast. Totally different way of life, I'm guessing. How difficult was that for you at the beginning?
I would say that I make no apologies for being a mummy's boy. I absolutely idolized my mum. Every night I used to cuddle into her. And so I was very much a mummy's boy. So when I had to uproot, it was okay as a schoolboy. My dad used to travel down with me, take me down, we'd stay in a hotel together. He'd come and watch training, etc. But then when I went for the first time, full time, that was quickly became my worst nightmare. I'd never been away from my mum, my dad, my brothers, my sisters, and suddenly had to. I'm a very much a homer as well. You know, wherever I am, like when I was in Swindon, Newcastle tried to sign me, Sunderland tried to sign me. No, I don't want to leave because I was home. Swindon became my home. So I'm very much a homer. So that will sort of lead you into why I got so homesick, because wherever I laid my hat, that's my home. So that was the case. And of course, London, this big place called London is not the most friendly of places. They're very, very nice people, but once you get to know them, until you get to know them, it's pretty tough. So, you know, for instance, we're arriving at Seven Sisters carrying a case in each hand. You know, if I was at Sunderland train station, someone would be saying, or even Swindon, someone would be saying, do you need a hand, mate? You know, and they'd help you carry it. Whereas in London, I had to plod along and nobody would even say hi, smile at you, nothing. So it was very difficult. And yeah, I got very, very homesick and I ran off a hell of a lot of times. 6 times to be precise.
How did you get over that then? What happened to make you click and think, well, here we are, we're at Tottenham and, you know, this is my dream. I want to play professional football. Was it, I have to do this, or what happened?
No, Tottenham Hotspur made me get over it, to be honest. One, they took a seriously tough stance, but within the tough stance, they showed so much compassion as well. You know, their tough stance being that they said that if I don't come back, that they will retain my registration and I won't be able to sign for any other football club. So that was the tough stance to take. But then within that, they said, but what we are prepared to do is we are prepared to let you go home. We will pay your train fare. We will give you money for lodgings in Sunderland. We will pay for food and drink on trains and to taxi fares and give you spending money. So we will send you home every 10th day. Wow. So when I came down, I'd come down, I'd play the youth team game on the Saturday, and then the following Saturday, and I'd go home. And I'd stay home till the Wednesday. And I'd come back on the Wednesday night, play the Saturday and the following Saturday, and they'd pay for me every 10th day to go home to Sunderland all of the time. And this was unbelievable for me, for my mum and dad as well, because they got 100 quid I used to go there for 5 days, and they'd get 100 quid board and lodging. So my mum and dad loved it. And after about a year, I'd sort of settled, but I'd had this agreement with them. But I'd got so used to having the money, the money, because I was on 16 quid a week. So they used to give me 100 quid to go home and spend. So of course I didn't want to lose it. So what I used to do is say I was going home, but not go home and just stay in my digs all weekend. I'd just hide away, but keep getting the money. And then one day, my bloody friend from who I was in digs was, "Come on, do you want to go Coolbury Club?" I said, "No, man, I can't. I'm supposed to be in Sunderland." So he says, "Come on, let's go Coolbury Club, man. Come on." So anyway, about 10 o'clock at night, we go out to the Coolbury Club, don't we? It's where all the Spurs players go. Walk into the Coolbury Club, go to the bar to get a Coke. And who do you think standing at the bar? My youth team manager, Peter
Oh,
Shriek.
dear.
Oh, dear. So I called into his office on the Monday. They stopped all my payments, everything. So yeah, it was a big loss losing. I didn't get fined, mind. That was one consolation. But
Well,
yeah,
fair enough.
Spurs were great. Spurs were great.
I seem to remember years and years ago, Graham Souness had a similar problem when he came down.
Yeah.
He was a Tottenham youngster, wasn't he, at the start of his career? Yeah.
Exact same problem.
Yeah.
And he left Spurs as a consequence of it.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was something that Spurs had learnt from. I mean, there was some good players in my era who started out with me. He was a guy from Northern Ireland called Willie Spence. Honestly, he was a super player. And he got homesick and went home and never heard of him again. And he was absolutely so talented. So maybe Spurs learnt from past experiences.
Well, he obviously dealt with it very well. And eventually you make your debut at age 20. And a 3-0 win over Everton, I think. Yeah. How was that? Because there you are. You're a youngster from Sunderland. You've been with the youth team. You've been through all this. And then suddenly you get a first-team call-up. You're making your debut. How is that?
Well, one, it's a dream come true. Obviously, I'd played in the first team in friendlies, etc. I'd toured with them. But to actually make your first team league debut is one of the most exciting things that you can imagine. It's a fulfillment of your schoolboy dreams. And then you sit in the dressing room and you're getting changed. And you sort of look to the right and you've got Ozzy Ardiles, a World Cup winner. And you look to your left and you've got Glenn Hoddle, one of the best players in the world. What the hell do they need me for? At the age of 20. I actually got man of the match. I wasn't man of the match, but I got man of the match. I think I got the sympathy vote because I played well. I made a goal and played well, but I got the sympathy vote because I was an homegrown youngster coming through. And that's why I think I got, and obviously this big flowing curly hair. But it's difficult to get man of the match as a youngster coming in for your debut when you've got Glenn and Ozzy on the same pitch. So, but I was quite happy with it. And it was, my mum and dad were, I probably think that the whole of the world could hear my mum shouting when I ran to tell her. She was so proud. Wonderful. In every youngster's life, you set out. People say reset your goals when you've achieved your goals, and you should because everybody wants to make their debut in the first team. It's the most wonderful occasion, and I look back on mine and I think, wow, everything that I'd strive for as a kid, everything I'd dreamt about, everything that I'd talked about, everything that I'd trained day in, day out, and played day in and day out. And never went to watch football because I wanted to play football. It would just all come together at that one moment, and it's an incredibly proud, satisfying moment. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I can imagine, and what an era that was for Tottenham. Of course, the '82 Cup final. You get a winner's medal, don't you? The UEFA Cup final in 1984. I mean, these are great times for Tottenham, aren't they? The league has always kind of, I guess, just eluded Spurs, but cup competitions like this, these were great times, weren't they?
Oh, it was a wonderful team. It was a wonderful squad. More importantly, it was a wonderful club, and it was a wonderful club because, it's my belief that any manager that takes over at a football club, he has a responsibility to that football club, not just to build a winning team. He has to build a winning club, and by doing that, he has to set up a youth setup that produces almost like a conveyor belt of youngsters coming through year in, year out. And whether they're good enough to make the grade or not, you can be good enough to sell on, which will pay and fund the youth setup. And that's what Keith Birkinshaw built. He built a great football club with a great youth setup. And, if you look at the UEFA Cup final in '84, for instance, the vast majority of that team were all former youth players. Glenn Hoddle was injured. Garth Crooks was injured. Ozzy was injured. Steve Perryman was injured. Ray Clements was injured. Now, you lose 5 players of that ilk, any team in the world, you're going to struggle. But we won it with sort of 7 or 8 homegrown players. And for me, that sort of, at that time, it sort of summed up the football club and the importance of developing your own. Because, talk to Steve Perryman, and he says that every youngster, every world-class footballer, once upon a time, was a youth player somewhere. So why can't you produce your Lionel Messis or your Harry Kanes or your Glenn Hoddles? Why can't you? Because they all were produced somewhere. And it's a great point. And I genuinely believe that Spurs at that time had the most wonderful youth setup, and we were producing player on player, and even players that didn't make it there went on and had great careers elsewhere, like Ian Crook, Mark Bowen, Ian Cole-Else at Norwich. Great careers. So it was a wonderful time at that club, and obviously being part of 3 cup winning sides and a Charity Shield, it was incredible.
Yeah, gosh, so many of the names you mentioned there are linked with Swindon, of course. Keith Birkinshaw, who linked up again with the Tottenham connection as director of football at Swindon.
Yeah.
What a gentleman, I have to say.
What a gentleman.
Yeah, terrific. I mean, I met him a few occasions, and where I worked at the BBC in Wiltshire, there was a mad keen Tottenham fan. And I said to Keith Birkinshaw, would you come in and see this mad keen Tottenham fan? And he said, of course. And he walked into the newsroom, and this mad keen Tottenham fan, I'll never forget it. He was on the phone to somebody doing a very important story. He said, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ring you back. Put the phone down, and his mouth dropped to the floor because Keith Birkinshaw was in front of him. That's how much he meant to Tottenham fans, isn't it?
Yeah. No, he's an absolute hero, and an absolute, as you rightly say, an absolute gentleman. And to this day, I talk to him on a regular basis. He's 85 now. And he looks as young as you. He looks so well. He is so together. His mind's alive and alert. But I've got to say that sometimes in life you're fortunate to fall into a path that somehow you don't choose, but you choose, if you know what I mean. In fact, because when I signed for Spurs, Keith wasn't the manager. Keith then, as I signed full time, Keith became the manager. So that's what I mean, was I sort of fell into Keith rather than chose him. Terry Neal was the manager that I signed for as a schoolboy, but Keith was a wonderful guy. The job that he did at Spurs was, I genuinely believe that as a studier of Spurs history, I genuinely believe that the second best team ever in Spurs history was the 80 to 84 team. The sad thing is that as Keith left, resigned, the old group started to split up, and the old club started to slowly decline from the potential that, we should have won the title twice, Liverpool, Everton pipped us once, and we were there, we had it, and the backlog of fixtures or injuries, whatever, cost us dear. And that's my only regret about Spurs, is that I never won the title with a team that was just so wonderful. And sometimes, as we saw at Swindon too, sometimes the quality of the football that you play, this wonderful, open, fast-paced, flowing passing game, sometimes that actually doesn't go on and win you the title. It wins you cups, because creativity, as defined in the dictionary, is something that can't be reproduced at will. And when I look back to the Swindon team were head and shoulders the best team in Division 1 in the for the promotion team. Yet we never won the title. We got promotion, but we never won it. We had to go through the playoffs, which is the best way to go up, by the way. But should have won the title. There was no team anywhere near our level. But somehow that level of consistency when you're playing the beautiful game is harder to find for some reason. Never quite pinpointed why.
Well, we'll get on to Swindon, obviously, but let's move on to Chelsea then. You go there for 300 grand in September '85, and I jokingly said to you before about a Simod Cup tie at Swindon, which I remember very well indeed. 12,000 fans, 12,000 fans there, and I should say that in that team, Tony DeRigo, Kerry Dixon, Roy Wegerle, who had a spell at Swindon on loan,
David Speedy.
And one Micky Hazard. 4-0 defeat. What do you remember that 4-0 defeat?
What I remember is I knew that one day I'd be joining Swindon, so I thought I'd let you win.
Brilliant. But you did win the Full Members Cup there and Division 2 as well. So a couple of medals for you.
I won 2 medals for Chelsea. One was the Full Members Cup, where every club in the, I think we won 5-4 in the final, and the Simod Cup, or vice versa. I can't remember the names. It was something that Ken Bates had tried to, because the European banned from '85 after the ISIL disaster. So we introduced these new cup competitions to compensate for the lack of European football. I was lucky enough to win them twice, although I don't consider them as my greatest achievements. But at the end of the day, they're a medal, and they will go down in, although I never refer to them really, but I should, because they were cups that every club entered. So why not?
Yeah, Swindon narrowly missing out that year, of course, in the semi-final against Luton on the plastic pitch at Kenilworth Road, which is now like concrete, I would imagine, compared to today's pitches. Yeah. Portsmouth, a brief spell at Portsmouth, not too long. You went there in January 1990 before moving to Swindon. So how was Portsmouth for you? It was a brief stay, wasn't it?
I'm a little bit sad about Portsmouth in many ways, because I like to think that wherever I went, I gave the fans value for money. But at Portsmouth, they never got to see me, because it was almost like it was a sort of interim move to get me to Swindon with Ozzy.
Right.
So I'd have to leave one club to get there, if you know what I mean. It wasn't planned like that. It happened like that. But I always knew that at some point I'd be joining Ozzy. It just so happened that it happened quicker than I anticipated. But it didn't matter to me to play under Ozzy, knowing the style and having previously watched Swindon Town versus Sunderland at Wembley, and seeing the quality of the football they played that day. I couldn't have thought, other than Spurs, I couldn't have thought a better footballing team for me to fit into, because I wasn't going to go to a Wimbledon or a Watford. What was the point? I needed the ball. I didn't want to be looking up and getting a bad neck. So Swindon was perfect for my style under Ozzy and Glenn. So I'm pretty blessed all my career in that. Spurs were my style, Swindon under Glenn and Ozzy. Chelsea to a degree was slightly different, but after 6 months or so, I got all the other players to adapt to me. If I was on, I used to say to all the players at Chelsea, look, I don't mind you doing that, hitting Kerry Dixon or hitting David Speedy, I don't mind it. But if I'm on, give it to me, because I'll be able to find them better than you, right? So you give it to me, but if I'm not on, do that. And of course, after 3, 4, 5, 6 months, they adapted to my game. And if I was on, they gave it to me. Credit to them. They gave it to me whenever I was on. And if I wasn't, they would hit that long one to Dixon or Speedy. So that worked as well, but they weren't quite the style of Swindon or Spurs in terms of the passing style.
Yeah, Swindon won, Sunderland nil, arguably one of the greatest or most one-sided 1-0s you'll ever see.
I would agree with that. I've got to say, I remember speaking to Ozzy afterwards, and I said, Ozzy, what a team you've got there. I said, that was one of the most exciting 1-0 wins I've ever witnessed. Sunderland didn't have a kick of the ball in the whole 90 minutes. I don't think I knew hardly any of the Swindon players, and yet came away thinking, wow, that was a scorching hot day. It was breathtaking. Yeah. It was a breathtaking performance from Swindon.
You mentioned how you were sitting in the Spurs dressing room, and one side is Ozzy Ardiles and the other side is Glenn Hoddle. Now, I have to tell you, as a reporter at that time when Ozzy Ardiles joined Swindon, this is somebody I'd watched in the '78 World Cup on a grainy black and white television and thought, what a wonderful player this is. Hardly moves out the centre circle, directs the whole game. It's amazing. He walks down the stairs and you're suddenly thinking, Ozzy Ardiles is the manager of Swindon Town, and immediately he affects the style of play that you're talking about. So in November of 1990, you join a club which has been through the trauma of what happened a few months before, that one-sided final against Sunderland. 10 days later, demotion follows. What was the mood when you came to the county ground, would you say?
I would say that the players themselves, that it's almost like it's a subconscious mood. You're not aware of it. You think that you are. I wasn't party to it, so I was separate of it and could rise above it. But I always felt like there was an undercurrent of disappointment. Players who'd never been to the top would had it taken away from them through no fault of their own. So there was an undercurrent there that somehow you felt like the best way to describe it is that you could be in a game playing brilliant, and then something totally untoward would happen and you'd go 1-0 down. And that's when it would rear its ugly head, because you felt then that the world was against you, because this big thing of having this dream taken away from you. And then suddenly when things went wrong here, even slightly, it could have a knock-on effect that, oh, here we go again, So I think it was more of a subconscious thing than they would. I don't think any player would openly admit that they allowed the fact that they got relegated for financial irregularities to affect them on the pitch. But for me, being party to it, but not actually involved in the relegation, I sensed that there was an undercurrent there, but a subconscious undercurrent.
Yeah, obviously a big blow to everybody concerned. And as an outsider, you had that view, which is an interesting one, because, of course, we who are all involved in it, emotionally involved in it at the time, you are emotionally involved, so you don't take the objective view, but you did, and you obviously worked out that there was that undercurrent. And disappointingly, of course, promotion wasn't achieved, and Ozzy eventually moves on to Newcastle, doesn't he? And then not only does Adi Ardiles become manager of Swindon Town, but somebody called Glenn Hoddle stops playing at Monaco, where he'd been under Arsene Wenger, and he walks into the club. I'll never forget the day he does. And again, here you go. You had Lou Macari, Ozzy Ardiles, and Glenn Hoddle all in short succession. Not bad, I'd say.
It's incredible. When you actually put it in that light, it's incredible for a club. And I don't mean this in a derogatory way about Swindon, because I thought it was one of the most wonderful clubs. In fact, I had 3 of my happiest years in football there. It was a wonderful little club. I loved it. But to attract a manager of the size of name, Lou Macari, Ozzy Ardiles, Glenn Hoddle, I mean, wow. I mean, the public of Swindon must have thought it was Christmas. And of course, with that, it attracts better quality players in. And I know they can't maximise the potential to attract players in, because the club didn't have the money to spend on, or the vast amounts of money that of the players that they could attract. But still, they could attract players there that maybe wouldn't have come otherwise. I mean, I probably would never have looked at Swindon if it wasn't for Ozzy Ardiles. But for the club itself, Swindon, wow. I mean, 3 coups to say the least. I mean, wow. And they all did it in their own individual ways. Lou had a different style and a different training methodology to Ozzy, and Ozzy's was different to Glenn's. But ultimately, the results all felt the same. Lou did great, Ozzy did great, Glenn did great, so what it does prove is that there's more than one way to play football. There's more than one way to coach football, and different personalities, all 3 were very different, could achieve the same goals, if you like. And having worked with both Glenn and Ozzy, I could see the differences in their coaching methods, in their tactical methods, in their man management methods, but both equally as successful, and lessons to be learned as well. Lessons that, as a bystander watching on, you can see that there's more than one way to skin a cat, and these guys did it, and it was brilliant to be part of the 2 different successful eras and top managers and top players and top men.
Yeah, we often talk about the long ball game, don't we? But Glenn Hoddle plays a different kind of long ball game, doesn't he? A 60-yard pass into space for the man. I just remember a League Cup goal at Torquay in a 6-1 win or 6-0 win.
Yeah, I remember
First minute of the game, bang, down the right-hand side. Kerslake crosses it, it's 1-0. Oh, phone's ringing.
No, that's my doorbell.
Oh.
No, Glenn Hoddle hit more long passes than probably any other player I've ever seen. But notice I said pass.
Yeah.
A long ball, a long punt is just a long punt. Glenn Hoddle would play the pass, and it would be weighted with side spin, check spin, top spin, whatever was required. It would be weighted for the man running onto to not even have to control the pass. That's how good his pass was. And whether it be 70 or 60 or 50 or 10 yards, he played the pass that was required, at the weight it was required, at the speed it was required, and with the right spin that was required. He was just plain simply a genius.
Yeah, I always remember one pass at Ipswich on a Tuesday night, 4-1 win. And I think he was at the foot of one of the posts, and you thought,
I scored, didn't I?
I think you probably did. Yes, you did, Micky Hazard. There was a moment when you think, right, just get the ball away. He did, but it was a 60-yard pass to a Swindon player under pressure. It was just incredible, and that's the amazing thing. You remember it to this day, and you can see it in your head.
Yeah, listen, I don't know if there's ever been a poll of Swindon's greatest ever players, and obviously as a consequence of the League Cup final of 68, was it? 69.
Yeah.
Don Rogers would probably be very high on the poll. I find it hard to believe that anybody, and I mean anybody, could outvote Glenn Hoddle. He's just plain simply, in my lifetime, and I say this as a very talented footballer myself, Glenn Hoddle was the most naturally talented footballer that I've ever seen. That doesn't mean he was the best footballer, because Glenn had weaknesses to his game that, unfortunately, he was born with those weaknesses. The maybe not the fastest, not the quickest, not the toughest or whatever. He was tough, Glenn, by the way. So his weaknesses were sort of just natural deficiencies. But what a player. I mean, he was just, I'd put him up there with the best I've ever seen in terms of technical ability, awareness, skill, a pure genius. And sometimes as a player playing alongside him, sometimes it was just nice to stand back and watch and just say, wow, Glenn, wow. He was an unbelievable footballer.
With Ozzy, we only saw a couple of games, unfortunately, before.
Yeah, Ozzy got a bad injury and he was.
Yeah,
he
and so
leg.
that was, which is one of my great regrets, really, not to have seen Ozzy Ardiles play, and that wonderful.
Ozzy was a different kind of genius to Glenn.
Yeah.
Glenn was a totally natural footballer who could make the ball talk. Ozzy had the best football brain that I've ever seen. He was 3 or 4 steps ahead of the game. He would be take up positions that would intercept the pass, and he'd take the position up five players earlier, or 5 moves earlier. And he's a different kind of genius. He was a winner. He brought about giving everyone on the park a winning mentality. He made average players good players and good players great players. And his influence on a game. And one of the greatest things I ever heard him say was, he said, "Mickey, Glenn think he's the best player in the team." He said, "That's because I let him think he's the best player in the team." And it shows how clever a thinker he was. He was prepared to say, "You can be the best player, but I know I am." He was a genius. And as I said, if I had to choose between him and Glenn, what a choice. I would have to choose both. They were both just incredible footballers and very different. And that was what made them click. When they were in the team together, they clicked because they were different. Sometimes people used to say about me and Glenn when we were at Spurs and we played in the same team, you can't play Mickey and Glenn, the two alike. They played too much the same. So you've got to sort of separate them. What they didn't understand was that by having me and Glenn in the team, it sort of gave them control of the game. Whereas they would look at the negative, or when they've not got the ball, they can't get it back. But then you play other players to get it back. But with Ozzy, him and Glenn had that sort of different. They were different. Same with me and Ozzy. So I clicked with Ozzy as well. I clicked with Glenn. I understood Glenn's game because it was my game, and he understood mine. So we always knew where we were or what we were able to do, and trust. Glenn would give me the ball in a tight situation, sometimes too tight, knowing I could deal with it, and vice versa. And that's a key as well, trust. But both Ozzy and Glenn for me were 2 world-class footballers. That was I was honoured and thrilled to play alongside, and sort of speaks volumes for me that I managed to play 170 games with them at Spurs, but also to be playing under them as my manager. That was a further part of my education. They were my footballing education. They were absolutely brilliant, dream to work for. Even though I had my rows with them, I'm sure we'll be talking about them soon. I had a few rows with Ozzy, a few with Glenn. That's how it is. It became a father-son relationship in many ways, in that because I played with them and they were my mates, suddenly when they were saying, "Mickey, do this," it's like when your dad says, "Do this." "No, Dad, no, I'm not doing that." So it was a very difficult situation for me to be in. And I don't know if they had the same difficulty understanding the situation. I don't know. But for me, it was very difficult because they were good friends at Spurs, teammates. And here I am now that I've got to listen and do everything they ask. Quite tough.
Yeah, I can imagine so. That changed from mate to boss. Glenn did enough in that first little spell to keep Swindon up, didn't he? A memorable win, I remember, on a Tuesday night at Wolverhampton.
Wolverhampton.
Yeah,
I scored as well, didn't I?
You probably did as well, yes.
Oh, did you?
And in a Wolverhampton Molineux ground, which was a bit dishevelled at the time, if I remember rightly. Yeah. The following season was a building season, wasn't it? And then it comes towards 92-93. Let's get into the meat of that thing then, and build towards that playoff final at Wembley. Now, you played many of the games in that season, and as you said, the football was magnificent.
Yeah.
Unfortunately for you, though, injury starts to play a part, doesn't it, in the latter stages of that season, after the club had sort of, well, as you said, almost dominated what was Division 2, I guess, in those days.
Yeah, the sad thing for me was that I played in every single game, and then I tore it was against Wolves actually, at Swindon, that I tore my cartilage, and I didn't tear it in that game. I'd actually had it for 3 or 4 weeks, and Glenn just asked me to play with it, so I played with it and played with it and played with it, and then it got sort of pretty bad, so I went and had the operation. And obviously got back in time. I remember my first game back was Birmingham away, that incredible 6-4 victory. 4-1 down and winning 6-4. I mean, the story about that was incredible in that it was my first game back. I think I'd had one reserve game. On the way there, Glenn pulled me. He said, look, Mick, he said, I'm going to put you sub and bring you on after 60 minutes. And then I'm going to take you down to Swindon tomorrow and you can play 90 minutes in the reserves. Okay, Glenn, no problems. We get to the hotel where we're having the pre-match meal. Glenn pulls me aside and he said, Mick, change my mind. Oh, he said, I'm going to start you. I'm going to play you for 60 minutes and then I'm going to take you off after 60 and get you 90 minutes in there. So I was devastated. I was thinking 60 minutes today, 90 minutes tomorrow. I'm going to be knackered. So, of course, we go into the game, this Birmingham game, and we were 2-0 down and I created a goal right on half time to get us back in the game. And then we come out, we actually didn't deserve what we got, to be fair. We come out second half, they got 2 quick goals, 4-1. Of course, I think I made another goal to make it 4-2. I was involved in the build-up in another. It was 4-3. And then John Gorman, because 60 minutes arrived, John Gorman puts my number up. And I'm running the game along with Glenn at this point. We're totally dominating it. And Glenn's gone running over to him and said, what are you doing? What are you doing? Can't you see we're back? Anyway, we win 6-4, which I think probably almost or very close to confirming our place in the playoffs. Unfortunately for me, every time I played, my knee sort of blew up a bit. And I was never, I was fit during the games because I took ibuprofen. But to train, I wasn't taking ibuprofen to train. So I sort of maybe wasn't as sharp as I could have been, or I wasn't keeping as sharp as I could have been. And obviously, when the Tranmere games came along, he put me sub, the knee. I was very disappointed, obviously, because I'd played the vast majority of the games. I'd been a key member of the team as well. I'd played actually very well. I was voted in the Division 1 Team of the Year 3 years running. So I was very disappointed to miss out on the Tranmere games and then Wembley. I felt sure he would play me at Wembley. Obviously, my knee had had a good rest at that point. I'd built it up more. I'd trained more, so I was getting fitter and fitter. So to miss, I thought, sure, Wembley's made for the Glenn Hoddles and the Micky Hazards of this world. And I felt sure I would be playing at Wembley and was incredibly disappointed when he told me I wasn't playing. But I said to him, well, look, Glenn, you're not playing me, but you got to put me sub because I'll come on, I'll be the difference. I said, you bring me on, I'll make the difference. If things are not going well, I said, bring me on, I'll turn the game. You know, I got his excuse. My knee was swelling up. So I understood. That didn't mean I accepted it. I understood it, but I didn't accept it. So I was very upset with him. But I knew that if things went wrong, I could come on and be the difference and get us promotion, you know. So, yeah, he named me sub. Unfortunately for me, we got to 3-3. We're 3-0 up and it got back to 3-3. And I thought, well, this is what I was talking about. Get me on, I'll win the game for you. And John didn't put me on until about a minute to go. Yeah. Then I came on and did my knee. So I did my knee. Then
it was one of the greatest games I think Wembley's ever seen. I mean, I was behind one of the goals. I was doing touchline reporting, and Glenn Hoddle's first goal was an absolute treasure. Craig Maskell gets the goal. Sean Taylor with that incredible diving header, and then Leicester come back, and the whole world goes bonkers. It was an incredible 10, 15 minutes when you think the whole world's gone mad. What's going on? And then, of course, Chalky goes up into the opposition penalty area and a penalty is awarded. Yeah. What was your view from the sideline? I mean, you're watching all this go on. What are you thinking? Apart from wanting to get on desperately, of course, what are you thinking?
Well, obviously at 3-0, I was thinking, that's it. I'm not getting on. We're in the Premier League and I'm not going to play any part of it. And then they got back to 3-3, and that's when I thought, get me on. I'll turn this game. I'll make the difference. I'll win this game for you. Get me on. I'll win it. I'll win it. And then we got the pen. I must be honest. Paul Bowden took it, didn't he?
Yeah.
I've got to be honest. I was flabbergasted. And I mean, absolutely and totally flabbergasted. Glenn Hoddle didn't take it. I thought, wow, the best penalty taker in the game, and you're not taking a penalty. No, remember, if they score, I'm not getting on anyway. So, but Glenn has to take this penalty. He has to take it. When I saw Paul Bowden going up, I was thinking, no, Glenn Hoddle. That doesn't mean I'm not being bad to Zippy. Zippy was a very, very good player and more than capable of scoring a penalty. But I always say that your best penalty taker takes the pen. And Glenn Hoddle was someone who'd taken penalties at the very, very, very highest level. And I can't recall seeing him miss. He was a brilliant penalty taker. So I've got to be honest, this has got to be Zippy. It's got to be Glenn. Didn't matter. Zippy scored and the rest history. We're in the Premier League.
Yeah, madness, really. And as you said, those of us who've watched Swindon, over 50 years, suddenly you're right in the Premier League and then joining hands with Manchester United, Liverpool, Arsenal, all these people. You've played against them. And as somebody who's come into this, what did you think of that as an achievement for a club like Swindon?
I think it was probably in the reality of it, it was probably the greatest achievement that I probably ever did. People say, "Well, you won the UEFA Cup, you won the FA Cup." Well, yeah, but I won them with clubs and players that were expected to at least compete to win those things. At Swindon, it was never dreamt a club the size of Swindon would ever enter the Premier League. Remember, this is the Premier League where it had become vast amounts of money on offer. Clubs were getting richer and richer and richer, and the smaller clubs were getting poorer and poorer. And Swindon, being one of the smaller clubs, just never ever felt possible. And obviously, it had been achieved 2 years earlier, so that changed the thinking. But in reality, it hadn't really. Aussie's team was in a false position as well, as Glenn's team were. So the achievement is absolutely and totally right up where with the very best of them. I suppose it's a bit like Leicester winning the Premiership in many ways. Unbelievable achievement. Not so sure it'll ever be achieved again in the history of Swindon Town Football Club. Certainly not in its present format. But what an achievement. I mean, to do it twice in 3 years was just absolutely amazing. And to pull on the red shirt of Swindon Town in the Premier League was like, wow. I mean, wow. I'm sure every Swindon fan that sits back today and thinks about that era thinks, wow, how blessed were we as fans to have a team that played the quality of football that team under both Aussie and Glenn played, and to have a team that 2 years in 3 got promotion to the Premier League. It doesn't really bear thinking about. And as I've said, it must rank as one of my own individual greatest achievements to win promotion to the Premier League. And play in I think I probably played about 50 games that season, 48 games. I can't remember exactly how many, but I played a lot. And play that many games on the way to the Premier League was phenomenal. It never seemed possible. To this day, it doesn't seem possible, but the impossible was achieved.
Well, it's lovely to hear you say that after the career you had. That shirt behind me, of course, is I don't know if you see it, the Premier League shirt.
That's the one.
That's the one you wouldn't have worn, but it is one that was worn in those days. Then within days, of course, and there was a slight suspicion that we would see the departure of the manager. He leaves to go to Chelsea. And then, of course, subsequently, Colin Calderwood goes to Tottenham. And how did you have an inkling that was going to happen? Did you think, the call of Chelsea would be too much?
I always thought it was a possibility that, we're talking about one of the biggest names in football, Glenn Hoddle. He was just a pure genius. So because he'd had success in his first managerial job, he got a club like Swindon Town to the Premier League. It was an incredible achievement by anybody's standards. So if you don't generate interest from the bigger clubs or even the middle of the road clubs, then why not? So I honestly felt from the bottom of my heart that Glenn wouldn't leave. I thought Glenn would stay that one season. I really did. And you have to remember that now they'd become a manager-player relationship rather than player-player. So as a player-player, I would be closer to the decision-making process, or get a feel for it at least. But as a manager-player, you have no, there has to be a gap between player-manager.
Yeah.
So of course, I wasn't able to get a feel for what Glenn was thinking, or what potential. I knew there was clubs there, but I didn't get a feel for what Glenn was thinking, and I wouldn't dream of discussing it with him. So was I surprised? Not that he had lots of interest. Surprised that he didn't stay one more year. And I've got to say that it's something that to this day, I always think, if Glenn Hoddle had stayed at Swindon Town Football Club, would Swindon Town Football Club have survived in the Premier League? And I have to say yes, because other than the conceding of goals, Swindon Town Football Club matched every team they played. We just couldn't stop the goals going in. But in terms of the quality of the football, and they got loads of plaudits for the quality of their play, but ultimately the quality of the play doesn't win you games. We needed to find a goal scorer earlier. Jan Auger came in, scored later, that following Christmas. But defensively, we needed to not concede so many goals, because at the top, the difference from Div 1 to the top, having been there all my life, is that, for instance, as a midfield player, when I'm at the top, if a gap appears, I have a split second to see it. And if I take longer than a split second, it closes because the top players, right? But in Div 1, I could keep, if the gap appears and I don't see it for 2 seconds, it could potentially still be there. Well, that's what it's like at the top, in that the chance appears, bang, it's in the back of the net. And Div 1, a chance appears, they'll get 1 in 5, but at the top. And that's ultimately what did for Swindon, in that, one, we lost some good players, myself included, but also needed to sign a dominant, controlling centre-back. And maybe Glenn would have been, because he played sweeper, he would have controlled it better if he'd stayed as player manager. And I was very disappointed that he left, because I genuinely believe that with Glenn there, we wouldn't have gone down. I genuinely believe that, because number one, not only was he a good manager, tactically very astute, he was a brilliant player. So at a club like Swindon, who couldn't afford to go and buy a Glenn Hoddle, we actually got a Glenn Hoddle for free.
Yeah. Yes.
So having him on the pitch was a massive plus, because what you got was a 60, 70, 80 million pound player playing for Swindon Town. And he would have been such a difference out on that pitch, not just the player, but as the leader as well, and pulling the strings around him, pulling the defenders around him. So yeah, it was a big loss, not just in the fact that we lost him as a manager, but the fact that we lost an 80, 90, 100 million pound player on the pitch.
Would that have made a difference, do you think would you have stayed for longer had he stayed? Because Spurs came calling, obviously.
Yeah.
Let's be honest, they're your first love. But would that have made a difference?
I don't think it would have been allowed to happen if Glenn had stayed. And I don't think Spurs would have came calling out of respect for Glenn. So it probably wouldn't arose. If it did arise, I've got to say that I would have chose Spurs. That's my they are my heart. So I just believe that if Glenn had stayed, number one, it wouldn't have happened. It would not have happened. The club, Swindon, with Glenn in that role, was a force. It was a force, and it was a force that I know for a fact that Ozzy would not have come for me if Glenn was there. Full stop. So it wouldn't have been a decision that I would have had to make. It's very difficult for anybody at the twilight of his career to say no to a club like Spurs, particularly when it's your first love as well. But I've got to say that my time at Swindon was the most wonderful time, and I could actually live through the 3 years or whatever it was that I had there. I could live it all again, because there wasn't a day where I felt unhappy in the old 3 years. It was a wonderful club. The fans treated me wonderful. The people were wonderful. I met so many. I lived in Marlborough, and that was a wonderful place to live. I've got to say, I would rank my happiness at Swindon alongside my happiness at Spurs.
Wow.
That's how happy I was.
Well, that is some plaudit. So thank you very much indeed for that. And you were greatly, obviously, respected by all Swindon fans. You go back to Tottenham, retirement 2 years later, youth academy coach at Crystal Palace. And I have to ask, I mentioned this to you before, because a great deal of publicity came about the fact that you were taking the knowledge. Now, I have a great deal of respect for people who do this thing, because to take the knowledge and become a taxi driver in London, my goodness me, that is a momentous achievement. So from being a footballer to doing that, you sort of said that you found it easy, but it is a monumentally difficult thing to do, isn't it?
It is. Look, it all happened by accident. A friend of mine was doing it. Called into my house. I said, "What are you doing?" I'd been playing golf every day for about 2 years. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I do the knowledge now." And I said, "Oh, do you want some company?" I thought, we'll make a day of it up London. We'll go out, we'll have breakfast, then we'll have lunch. And we made a day of it, and we had a great day. And then he said to me, "Oh, do you want to come out Saturday?" I said, "Yeah, we'll go out Saturday again." Anyway, so I did about 4 or 5 days out with him. I quickly realized that I knew everything that we were doing, because I had this, I wasn't aware I had it, but after doing the runs, everything seemed to just sit in my head. So I had 4 or 5 great days with him. And then he said, "Are you coming out tomorrow, Sunday?" I said, "Yeah, I'll pick you up at 5 in the morning," because we used to do it in a car. So I drove round to his house at 5 in the morning, knocked on his door, no answer, knocked and knocked, no answer. So I thought, I'll go and do it by myself then. So I went uptown and I did it by myself. And then I thought, I did like 80 runs now. There's only 400 to do. I might as well do them all. So I just carried on and did them all, and never really had to work hard at it. Most people, they have to call over. I never, ever had to call over. So I wasn't, when I got in from doing the 4 or 5 runs that I would do, I'd go home and chill and rest and not look at it again till the next time I went, because I knew it. So it wasn't, because of this photographic memory, it wasn't as difficult as some people find it. And of course, when you get tested by the examiners, it's also a test of your character, not just a test of your knowledge. They test your character as well. But all through my life, I'd been sort of spat at, called names, test of your character to put you off your game. So they were never going to make me lose sight of what I was trying to achieve when I was in these things. And I used to sit there with people in the waiting room, and they'd be shaking like a leaf and being sick. And I used to look at them and think, what's the big deal here? The worst that can happen is you don't know what he asks. And if you know what he asks, then you've got it made, because of the beauty of the tests. The examiner, he actually doesn't know what you know, right? So he might think that you don't know what he's asking you, but you might just know it. So I never feared what he was going to ask, because I always thought, well, I know there's 10 million things that you've got to learn. And I probably have learned 1.5 million of them. But he doesn't know what 1.5 million I know, you know? So he's got a idiot lucky, you know? And rarely did he come up with things that I didn't know, because they didn't know what I knew. So I didn't get fazed by it. That didn't mean I didn't get nervous on my first appearance. I did. When I first went in, I wasn't nervous while I was waiting. And when he called my name, I stood up, my legs went to jelly. It's like taking a penalty. And you sort of have a blank. But the minute that he says, can you take me from Manor House to Gibson Square? Oh, leave on the left, Green Lanes, right Ivory New Park, right Ivory Grove. You know, your confidence is up and you're flying. So no, it didn't faze me at all.
Brilliant. And I guess you must have had the occasion when people got in the cab and said, "You're Micky Hazard." Did you have any famous people say that to you? I know we've got a question about this a little later, but you know,
I did.
Yeah,
I've had a few famous ones, but many years ago when I was at Spurs, we were playing. I think it was Barcelona in the semi-final of the Cup Winners' Cup, and I was voted man of the match. And Henry Cooper, he presented me the man of the match award, and he got in my cab one day.
Wow.
Yeah, he got in my cab and he says, "Micky Hazard, I presented you a man of the match award." I mean, incredible. And what a gentleman, because when we got to my stop, I said to him, "Don't worry, Henry, don't worry." It was something like £7. "Don't worry, Henry, have it on me, have it on me." And he bunged a tenner through my window. What a gentleman, eh?
Yeah, well, what a legend. If only
it was 20, or I'd have got home quicker.
But for a split eye against Cassius Clay in '63,
yeah, exactly.
Who knows what might have happened in the world of heavyweight boxing. Micky, what an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Really appreciate it. And of course, we've got to say to you, we wish you all the very best with your health, because you know you are one of the great footballers that England's produced. So thank you very much, Steve, for your time this evening.
My pleasure, Vic.
And I know Chris is around somewhere. She'll appear somewhere from the ether. There she is. Hello, Chris. I know you've got some questions. You've got some questions lined up for him, haven't you?
I have got some questions. A few of them you've actually answered in the interview.
Whoops, didn't mean to.
First one was from Simon Maslin. If we had kept all the Swindon Town players that moved to Tottenham and Glenn Hoddle, how do you think we'd have got on in the Premiership? Which you've answered that one by saying, yes, we would have stayed.
Definitely.
Vicky Rochester, why did you always have to do a 360-degree turn before? But she does say, but it was an amazing pass as well, usually. So
yeah. Now, why did I? Well, number one, it was, you have to remember that it's generally when you're doing the turn, someone's tracking you, yeah, chasing you. So you have to throw them one way to come back the other way. So the object of the turn was to throw them one way, and because I always knew what was going on behind me. So in other words, David Kerslake might be making a run down the right as I'm moving towards the left. And when I did my 360-degree turn, I'd then just ping the pass straight into his run. So it was more of a way to lose my opponent who was chasing me.
And following on for that, did you ever make yourself dizzy doing it?
No. Well, maybe in later life, yeah, but not while I was doing it, no.
And we got another one a bit later as well. One from James Spencer. Who are your mates at Swindon, and when you were a Swindon player, and do you still keep in touch with Glenn? Yes,
I speak to Glenn a lot. Play golf with him. I do Q&A evenings and dinners with him. So I see Glenn a lot, and obviously since his art problems, I kept in touch with his cousin, first cousin, who kept me fully up to date and informed of exactly what Glenn had been through. And obviously, from time to time, Glenn messages me and asks me how my health is. So yeah, I spoke to him 2 days ago, actually. My friends at Swindon off the pitch, I would probably say that I've got to say they were ever such a nice group of lads. David Kerslake, was probably my best friend at Swindon. He was the one that I probably hung around with more than anyone else. Ross McLaren. I generally got on well with most. I quite liked them all. There wasn't anyone that I didn't like or didn't respect. I thought that sometimes there was youngsters like Fitzroy Simpson and Nicky Summerby coming through. They were youngsters. Sometimes I went out with them, and obviously with me living down in Marlborough, and sort of my house back home in Hertfordshire, meant that I had a lot of free time. So I would do things with the boys, would go sauna, steam room, etc. Fraser Digby I got on fantastic with. Lots. There was a lot. Colin Calderwood. Really, honestly, I thought it was a really, really nice group of boys, and the success that they had doesn't surprise me, because any success at any football club, there has to be a togetherness amongst the players and the management and the fans. And I felt at that time there was a togetherness at Swindon, which sort of led it to the success that it had.
Good. Question from James David: the best player you have played with?
I'd have to choose. I've played with some very good players. Klinsmann, Sheringham. I've played with lots of very, very good players. But I would have to. I can't see beyond Glenn and Ozzy. I think that my two favourite players in the English game was Glenn Hoddle and Ozzy Ardiles. Not a shadow of doubt. Brilliant players.
Ian Hadrell, we're going back to your turning. Cracking player. But are the rumours true that you caused the crop circles in Wiltshire?
Absolutely spot on true. That's where I used to practice the turn.
Well, they were always in the Marlborough area, Micky.
Exactly.
Question from Steve Leonard. Swindon pre-season tour of Cyprus in 1994. Was it true that you broke the club curfew?
1994. Wasn't me. I wasn't there.
You were back at Tottenham by then. Yeah.
No,
I'd left by then. So I never broke the club curfew, but let me just say this, I would have.
If you'd been there. Have you been back at the county ground since you left?
Yes. I did. I was invited down to do a Q&A in one of the lounges by the club. I also played in a charity game there for Air Ambulance.
Oh, right, yeah.
And there's one or two other occasions. I stayed in the hotel in the city centre. I forget its name. Big changes, by the way. I got lost. I couldn't find the De Vere Hotel or nothing. I was lost. I was like, where am I? So I only knew the one way in. If I took off Junction 15 on the M4 and came down, and then I come to the Magic Roundabout. Yeah, I've been down there 3, 4, 5 times. Not as often as I should, but you have to appreciate, for me to come down there, it's like a 2.5 hour drive. Exactly. So it sort of sometimes puts me off, but I've been down there quite a few times. And
we should say, you do a lot of work for Tottenham as well, don't you?
I work at Tottenham.
Yeah.
I work at Tottenham on match days, so my match days are totally tied up. So I can't go to other grounds, for instance. But I work for Tottenham, yeah.
And the good old favourite question we usually get: what's your favourite five-a-side team from players you have played with?
What, for Swindon or for everyone?
For anybody.
Well, it would be. Oh, what a great question. Glenn Hoddle, Ozzy Ardiles, Micky Hazard. Great goalkeeper would be Tony Parks, and probably Steve Perryman.
Not a bad team.
Very,
not
very
a bad
team.
Yeah.
And this isn't a question, but I'm just going to say some of the comments we've had on there. Fantastic player, absolute legend, absolute class player, and a lot of them say best wishes to you from the supporters in the club.
My best wishes back to all the fans. I obviously had I can't speak highly enough of my time at Swindon Town Football Club. It's the second close to my heart. It'll not replace Spurs, but then if I could choose a time in my football career to relive again outside of Spurs, it would be Swindon. The club, the people, the town, Marlborough, everything about it. I found myself in a really, really nice place for 3 years, and it's something that I look back with great fondness and sadness as well. One, because I left and maybe would have finished my career there, but I got to finish it at Spurs, my first love. And two, because sometimes I wonder, like the fans do, if Glenn had stayed, what could we have achieved in the Premier League? So yeah, lots of happy memories, lots of lovely people that I met, and would have no qualms about coming back there anytime. I'm welcome back.
Well, you'd always be welcome, Micky, you know that. And you must be delighted that the club seems to be on the up again. I mean, it's had a roller coaster, as you know,
yes,
since your time, but it does seem to be on the up again with a bright young manager, as we mentioned before. So things do look to be on the up again. Yeah,
well, it's with clubs like Swindon, if you haven't got stability, then it's much harder to succeed. And once you start bringing in some sort of stability, then the club can start to flourish and grow. And that's what's happening. They've got a bit of stability, they've got a good young manager, and it's starting to grow again. And hopefully it can. I wouldn't wish them on the Premier League as much as I'd like to see them there. Sometimes I think that as a smaller club, when you hit the Premier League, it sometimes can destroy you if things go wrong, and it takes a long time to recover from it. But more certainly, it should be a championship team, and well worthy of that, because I had so many wonderful, happy times and memories there. So I'd love to see them back in the championship. I'd like to see them in the Premier League, but I worry what the long-term effect of the Premiership would be on a club like Swindon. We've seen it happen with so many other clubs of similar ilk that it's difficult to, you get that sort of year in the Premier League, you get relegated, you then get the parachute payment, but unfortunately the salaries and everything goes sky high because you're in the Premier League. I remember when we got to the Premier League, I got a phone call off John Gorman, and he said I'd already they'd offered me a 2-year contract which which I was about to sign on X amount of money. And John Gorman rings me because we were in the Premier League, and he says, "Look, I want to give you this." I said, "But John, I haven't asked for that." He said, "But I want to give you it." So he gave me more money. So there lies one of the problems with Premiership football, is the vast amounts of money on offer just for being there can often put the club in a very bad position financially 2 or 3 years down the line. And I wouldn't like that to happen. I'm sure it happened at the time, and I wouldn't like it to happen again. So, championship, please.
That'll do nicely. We take that right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Micky, thank you so much for your time.
No.
An absolute pleasure and a joy to speak to you. So I really appreciate it.
Pleasure's all mine, trust me.
And as we've said before, we wish you all the very best with your continuing health, and
thank you. And you too.
Good to see you up and about. Thank you.
Thank you, Vic.
Yeah, thank you very much, Micky.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
See you all soon. Anytime you need me again, just let me know.
We will. Don't worry.
Thank you.
See you all soon.
Thank you.
See you later.
Bye.
So that's all for tonight. So next week we go back to our Monday slot, and we have got the Duncan Shearer. So please join us then for that one. And the week after we have John Moncur. So we've got a couple of good ones coming up. So
those players Micky would know, of course. So that's
I know both of them. I made